Now, two important things about last night's budget. First, it should help the Liberals win the next election. And a lot of people will love this budget. I mean, what's not to like? Lots more spending on health, on aged care, on money for the women's lobby, tax help for the lower paid, and on it goes. Not a nasty cut at all in the budget, which of course is why, meanwhile, is pushing up our debt to an astonishing $1 trillion. Second thing, that said, a Labor budget could only be worse. In fact, it might even have been identical to this one. I mean, you just listen to Labor's criticism so far of it. You know, the Liberals should have done this earlier, or they were just forced to do all this. Now, perhaps the one real difference between what Labor would have done and this budget, Labor would have kept the JobKeeper subsidies going for even longer, even though the economy is already bouncing back. Where's the crisis now that this budget is supposed to be fixing? Now, those 2 points alone will make a lot of Liberal voters think, well, this budget must be good enough after all, good enough for us. If it helps Labor, the Liberals win and it keeps Labor out, and great. Although Treasurer Josh Frydenberg didn't like the budget being framed in that way. He didn't like being asked today just what in this budget reflected a true Liberal philosophy, like how about not bearing ourselves up to our necks in debt?
Press Club last year, I'm sure you remember, you spoke about supply-side reform and Thatcher and Reagan type policies. You told the Coalition Party Room in June last year the next election would be about limitless providers versus enablers. I'm going to borrow the vernacular of a former Treasurer and say what is in the budget for the true believers, the true Liberal believers, the ones who believe in a reforming Conservative government who are better than the other mob at budget repair. What is the difference between a Liberal and a Labor government at the moment?
Well, this is a Liberal budget. And at the heart of this budget is the concept of backing the private sector. I said it in my speech last night. 8 out of every 10 jobs in Australia are in the private sector. And we want the private sector to feel confident to invest, to hire and to grow. That's what the business investment incentives are about. That's what the loss carryback measures are about. That's what measures like regulatory change around the AAT and the ATO are all about. At times of national crises, there are no ideological constraints. And if I walk into the wilderness one day and know that I've done my small bit to help a generation of Australians avoid long-term unemployment, what the economists call the scarring of the labour market, I will be proud of that.
Now, I thought that was a really good question, and I thought that was, well, many of you will think that was a very good answer. But I would not be doing my job if I didn't still point out a couple of big dangers. One, there is absolutely no thought in this budget to ever repaying this record debt. I mean, this budget takes us up to, what, 15 years straight of ranking up deficits? No sign of any surplus at all. In fact, in working out this budget, the government found, to its big surprise, it had, lucky surprise, you know, it had $104 billion more than it expected just 6 months ago. The economy was healthier than it thought. Yet what did it do? It didn't save that $104 billion, it spent it, almost all of it. $96 billion of it over the next 4 years. So if interest rates do go up, the payments, the interest repayments on this, payments on this huge debt, that's going to kill us. And the second big worry, immigration. The government wants a sugar hit again, bringing in just as many immigrants as we did before the virus closed our borders, even more than most years. 235,000 people a year in just 3 years from now, as if the coronavirus by then, pip, gone. That is so many people. To fit them all in, we would have to build a new Sydney every 2 decades. It's insane. And in my opinion, that rate of growth hurts our cohesion. How's the national identity today? What's more, you bring in that many people, there are a lot of workers then coming in to compete for jobs. And I think that's going to take the heat off employers to pay higher wages to locals, which cuts across exactly what the Treasurer said he wanted.
We want to drive wages up. The way to do it is through driving the unemployment rate down.
I was joined earlier by Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew Clennell, thank you very much for your time. You asked a great question today of the Treasurer, what in this budget is it that is particularly liberal? What did you make of his answer? It's quite passionate. Did you find it convincing?
No, I did not. In fact, I mean, look, I've got a lot of admiration for Josh Frydenberg, and I suspect Scott Morrison steers a lot of this as well. It's got to be said, but it's just a very political document. And again, you know, they haven't been too courageous with it. They've just extended stimulus measures that they think are popular. I guess they'll say we're about tax cuts. Labor will say we're about services. That's the distinction. But on a lot of issues in the budget approach, I think there's hardly a cigarette paper between them. And his argument about walking in the wilderness and he saved all those jobs is fine, but that was last year, Andrew. That was JobKeeper last year. Now we've got 5% unemployment. Now that we found out the borders shutting actually meant that there were extra jobs out there. Now we've got an iron ore prices $230 instead of $55. So they aren't the same settings. No matter how much they stand up and say, you know, we're still in a pandemic, it's all a basic pre-election calculation on their part. So, no, I'm not convinced by it. I think there are a lot of political decisions being made at the moment.
Yeah, but, you know, I've seen a lot of commentators, myself included, have been criticising elements of this budget, important elements, yet I think it is clear that the voters will like it. In fact, that seems to be the whole philosophy behind it. So, I mean, job done, full marks?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I knew someone who worked in the Turnbull government who told me that in the 2018 budget, Scott Morrison had a number of ideas. He would send them out to focus groups, and the ones that were popular he would put in the budget, and the ones that were not, he would not. And I suspect there's been a similar approach here. But my argument is that's no way to lead in a sense. You've got to. This is a time where you could do a few reforms. And I think you'd make it through the election cycle anyway. I think Morrison's odds on to win. And you'd show you stood for something, but more importantly, you'd get the mandate so it would be easier to get through the Senate once you did it, because they talked it up last year. We're going to do IR reform. Frydenberg said we're going to do the supply side reform. It all amounted to absolutely nothing in the end. And what have we got to show for it? A lot of debt and deficit. Look, I was okay with that last year. We were, large sections were locked down for, Victoria was locked down a lot of the year. The rest of Australia was locked down for 6 weeks to 2 months. So there was a need for money. But I just don't think you've got the same need now. And I don't fully buy the argument that, without this, everything's going to collapse. And even if you got towards that situation, you can readjust again. So, yeah, I think it's very interesting, Andrew, that Josh Frydenberg has said in a number of media interviews, this is a Liberal budget. Well, if there was any doubt about it, why would you have to say it? It's like saying that they always tell you as a politician, so never say there's not a crisis, because then everyone thinks, hang on, is there a crisis? He gets up and says, oh, it's a Liberal budget. Oh, okay. Good to hear. You're in the Liberal Party.
That's exactly correct. But Andrew, that raises the question. I mean, I've heard Labor have a couple of goes at trying to criticise it, but basically I end up with the idea, even from them, that this is a budget they would have loved to have delivered. All right, they might have extended, the JobSaver subsidies a little bit longer, but that's about it. I mean, I'm struggling to find a bit of difference. So where does this leave the Labor Party?
Well, that was the basis for my question. What's the difference between a Liberal and Labor government? There doesn't appear to be that much at all. And, it's difficult, and I think it's quite deliberate to put them in that sort of position. And I think it's telling. Kenny Heatley, one of our reporters, we sent him on the streets of Sydney, and everyone said to him, you should keep spending, don't rein in spending. They were worried. So that's what the focus groups told the government, so that's what they went for. But what about their political stripe? What about ideology? Now, Josh Frydenberg quotes John Howard, who told him before JobKeeper, ideology is not a constraint in an economic crisis. I guess the question then becomes, are we still in an economic crisis? I don't feel we are. I don't feel we are at all. So I think they should have taken a different approach to this document. And I dare say if there wasn't an election around the corner, they would have. For Labor, well, they need to come up with some points of difference. There's absolutely no doubt. Because otherwise, what are they offering? Scott Morrison light.
Well, not only that, I mean, Labor's always coasted along, or for a long time, has coasted along on the lazy assumption that, they do what the Liberals did, but spend more. And I don't think that works anymore. I think that, the tidal wave of spending, etc., they've got to have a more nuanced and braver approach, I think. But anyway, look, like we both agree, this is popular with the people. So good luck to Josh Frydenberg. I think he's one step closer to becoming Prime Minister himself.
Yeah, he's short odds, but, lots can happen.
It sure can, but not unless Josh Frydenberg wills it, as far as he's concerned. Thank you, mate.
Thanks, Andrew.